Under God, 7th edition, updated and revised by William C. Hendricks, Chapter 17. Important ideas to look for. Throughout most of our history, a two-party system has existed. The two-party system helps to bring stability to our government. Political parties have important responsibilities in the affairs of government. Voting is one of our most precious liberties. Liberty demands responsible citizenship. The tyranny of a prince is an oligarchy is not so dangerous to the public welfare as the apathy of a citizen in democracy. Montesquieu. In the Republic, laws are made by leaders elected by the people. One of the chief ways of using our liberty in America is to select these leaders to make our laws. Intelligent voting is one aspect of liberty in action. Voting demands a choice. When voting, a person must make a choice among candidates. When an initiative, a referendum, or some other issue comes up at an election, the voter must choose to be for or against it. To select the most qualified candidate for a government office, or to support the best provisions for the people, the voter must study the issues and know the candidate's stand on political questions. The voter has the liberty to choose, but a choice must be made. Not only must the voter prepare for the day of election by studying candidates and issues, but many other preparations also need to be made. Candidates must be selected and issues presented. Campaigns must bring the political question of the day to the attention of the voters. Office seekers must take a stand on political questions that face the nation or community. Much of this preparatory work is done by the leaders of our political parties. A two-party system. Political parties are not new. They had existed in other nations for many years before our nation began. They developed in the United States when it was time to ratify the Constitution. When the Federalists favored the strong national government that the Constitution would provide, the Anti-Federalists were not in favor of such strong federal government. Since that time, there have been two major political parties in our nation. During some periods of history, the party differences have been small, but at other times there have been sharp differences on many issues. Party names have changed and questions about government have shifted through the years, but the two-party system has remained. Occasionally, a third party gathers around an issue. For example, the Greenback Party grew out of an issue about printing more paper money. When the problem was settled, the political party concerned about it was dissolved. In the 1992 election, an independent party candidate, Ross Perot, received over 19 million votes, over 18.6% of the popular vote, because people were dissatisfied with the candidates of the two major parties. The ideas of minor parties are often taken over by a major party. Thus, the minor party may influence political life even though no minority party candidate has won a presidential election. Advantages of the two-party system. If there were 15 political parties, a candidate could get more votes than any of the other candidates and still not have the support of very many people. In a two-party system, the winning candidate can enter into office with the assurance that a majority of the voters preferred him. Thus, a two-party system helps to stabilize our government. Under this system, a candidate who is unsuccessful in one election is free to run for office again in the next election. We have the freedom to disagree with the party that holds the power of the governmental office. We may use our freedom of speech and the freedom of the press to work for removal of that party from office at the next election. This is not revolution. It is simply the use of our liberty. This liberty could not be used under a one-party system, for to work against a government with a one-party system would be trying to overthrow the government. The two-party system has served quite well as a means of keeping the party in office sensitive to the concerns of the voters. Disadvantages of the two-party system. Although the two-party system has provided elected officials as often as the Constitution demands, some have questioned whether there might possibly be a better way. The Constitution says nothing about political parties, whether there should be one, two, many, or none. One disadvantage of having only two main political parties is that this system leaves little choice to voters who may think that both parties have weak programs or poorly qualified candidates. These voters now have their choice of 1, not voting at all, 2, voting for the representative of a very small party who will probably not win or even be generally noticed, or 3, voting for the candidate of the party that has the better of the two programs offered by the two major parties. Christians especially have been uneasy about having to vote between two candidates who have little or no concern for the principles of the Bible. Perhaps a multi-party system of electing officials would give each group of voters a better opportunity to vote in keeping with its principles. One way in which some democratic nations have tried to become more fair to each group of voters is to have proportional representation. By this arrangement, each political party is allowed to elect a percentage of the representatives roughly equal to the percentage of voters that party received in the last election. Whether or not such a multi-party system would be a good arrangement for our nation is difficult to determine, for it's never been tried. Many changes in our political procedures would be necessary before this could happen. In any case, Christians should always be on the lookout for new and better ways to be an influence for good in the political life of our country as well as in every area of life. To succeed, a candidate also needs campaign funds. Many citizens send small contributions to support the campaign of their favorite candidate. In the last few decades, many corporations, unions, and professional groups have formed political action committees. These political action committees exercise their influence in both the choice of candidate and collecting larger sums of money to support the candidate's campaigns. Duty of political parties. One of the main functions handled by political parties is the selection of candidates for public office. After a candidate has been chosen, the political party also helps to the campaign by giving him publicity and by urging party members to vote for him. The adoption of a party platform is important because the platform tells the voters what stand the political party has taken on public issues. Also, it contains goals which the party will attempt to achieve if elected. Political party campaigns help to arouse the interests of citizens in their government. They force government leaders to give information to the voters. By criticizing the opposition party and by answering the people who criticize them, the political party leaders give the voters a look at both sides of a question. Newspapers, radio, television, billboards, signs, buttons, the internet, and personal appearances are all used to arouse interest and gain the votes of the people. But the political party has services to perform between elections as well as during the campaign. In fact, its real function is most evident in the lawmaking process. The legislation proposed by the president or a governor and the laws passed by the Congress or a state legislature will generally reflect the political thinking or position of the party members. After a candidate has been elected, the political party tries to make the office holder do his work well. To accomplish this, the members of the party in each legislative body, national, state, or local, usually appoint one of their members to be party whip. The party whip tries to convince each member to vote the way the party promised in its platform. Party members realize that unless office holders do their work well, they will not be reelected when their term expires. Under our two-party system, members of the party which is out of power carefully watch everything done by those in office. Organization of political parties. A political party is an organization of citizens who agree in a general way on what government policy should be. Often members of the same political party differ from one another on many details, but they think the same way about most of the main problems. These political parties try to control the government in a legal way by having their candidates elected to public office. Both the Republican and the Democratic parties are made up of citizens from every part of American society: farmers, business people, factory owners, their workers, servicemen, civilians, citizens of every race, and members of all religious faiths. Membership in our American political parties depends merely on a matter of agreement with the party platform and the willingness to vote for the party's candidates. The freedom to choose a political party is part of the liberty that our nation provides. To succeed, an organization needs active leadership. This leadership is provided in the political parties by those members who are most earnest and eager for the success of the organization. Not enough Christians take the challenge for political leadership seriously. Nevertheless, Christian leadership in political parties is very necessary in our nation is to be a Christian nation. Just as we have local, state, and national governments, so the political parties are organized on the same three levels. The local level or grassroots of the party is made up of the precinct and county leaders. The precinct organization is closest to the people. On this level, party workers call on the voters, explain and discuss the issues, and do all they can to get people to vote for their candidates. The county committee helps the leaders of all the precincts in the county. The state committees are in charge of campaigns for the election of state candidates. They also regulate the election of appointment or delegates to the National Convention. The National Committee directs preparation for the National Convention, plans campaigns for the presidency and vice presidency, and helps all state and local committees in their efforts to win elections. Although many people belong to a party and vote a straight ticket for that party's candidates, many other citizens are independent voters. Independents do not belong to any party. They feel free to vote for one party in one election and another party in the next. Often, they vote for split ticket, voting for some of the Democratic candidates and some of the Republican candidates. Independent voters sometimes form organizations to work for candidates they consider well qualified, regardless of the candidate's political affiliation. Presidential primaries. Political leaders who desire to be nominated as the presidential candidate for their party often enter primary elections and campaign for votes in many states before the time of the National Convention. The voters of these states show by their ballots in the primary election whom they would like to have as the presidential candidate for their party. The convention delegates from such states are thus guided in their choice. In this way, a candidate may be assured of a large number of votes before the balloting officially begins at the National Convention. The demonstration to party members that he is a good vote getter. National conventions. National political conventions are usually held in July, several months before the November presidential election. The political party assigns each state a definite number of votes according to formulas drawn up by the National Committee. At one recent convention, the Democrats allowed each state to have twice as many votes as it had members in Congress. In addition, each state that voted Democratic in the last presidential election was allowed a bonus of 4 votes. The Republican plan for assigning votes to states was a bit different, but it also gave bonus votes to states that had voted Republican. Both parties also assigned delegates to the District of Columbia and the possessions and territories of the United States. According to these formulas, there were more than 2,000 delegates in attendance at each convention. Often states send more delegates than they have votes, so each delegate has only part of one vote. Each delegate usually has an alternate. From the moment delegates begin to arrive, the feeling of tense excitement begins. Newspaper reporters, radio announcers, and television crews prepare to bring the convention proceedings to the people of the nation. The hall is gaily decorated with flags and banners. Red, white, and blue ribbons are everywhere. The delegations of the states gather around their state banners, and many delegations bring their own bands. Sounds of shouting, clapping, and singing fill the air. When all the state delegations have arrived, and they have officially seated by the Credential Committee, the party officials enter the hall. Wave after wave of applause is accompanied by many hats thrown in the air, much handshaking and backslapping is done. Soon, a temporary chairman calls the convention to order, and the huge hall becomes silent. Everyone rises while the Star-Spangled Banner is played, and a chaplain may lead the opening prayer, asking for God's blessing upon our nation and his guidance in the selection of the presidential candidate. During the opening days of the convention, many party officers are elected. The party platform, which tells what the party has accomplished in the past and what it plans to do if elected, is presented by the committee that was asked to prepare it. The policies of the party are debated and changed so that they will please the greater number of party members and independent voters. When the party platform has been approved by the delegates, the important business of nominating and electing a presidential candidate begins. The chairman of the convention calls the roll of the states in alphabetical order. The chairman of any state delegation that wishes to do so then makes a speech nominating a candidate for president. After much applause, another speech supporting the nomination takes place. Sometimes a state delegation honors a favorite person, called a favorite son, from his own state by nominating him for the office of president. After all the nominations have been made, the roll call for voting begins. On the first ballot, the state sometimes votes for their own candidate. When the name of a state is called, the chairman of the delegation rises to announce the state's votes. As the voting continues, the state's favorite son change their vote to the candidate that they feel is best qualified to serve as the president of our nation. When one candidate receives a majority, the excitement of the convention reaches its peak. The delegates wave banners, parade around the hall, and sing and shout. Another vote is generally taken to give unanimous support to the candidate of the party. Occasionally, a candidate who is a choice of all the delegates may be nominated by acclamation rather than by the usual voting process. The procedure for selecting a vice presidential candidate is similar, but the delegates generally follow the wishes of the presidential candidate. This is done to make sure that the candidates work well together during their campaign and throughout their term in office. After the candidate for vice president has been selected, the candidates generally make their acceptance speeches amid the overwhelming applause of the delegates. Although it would seem that a national political convention is disorderly and run more by emotion and political pressure than good judgment, it's serious business. Here, the party platform is adopted. Through the convention process, the candidates who will run for the highest office in our land are officially chosen. Although the party members may have already indicated their choice through the primary elections, the delegates realize that their party must have candidates who are capable of providing good leadership. They choose the best they have, because otherwise the citizens would not vote for their candidate and their party would lose the election. A political party must pick its best candidates not only to win the election, but primarily to lead our nation under God in the years ahead. Selecting our candidates through the National Convention is one good illustration of liberty in action. You are free to become a member of any political party. You have the liberty to work and to become a leader in that party. If you become a leader, you may be able to represent your area as a delegate to the National Convention and help in the selection of the presidential candidates. Freedom to help in the selection of candidates is only one part of liberty in action. We also have the freedom to run for office ourselves. Whether we are seeking to become a senator representing our state in Congress, or a city council member representing our neighborhood in our own town, we have the liberty to campaign for votes in order to be elected to office. We may even choose to run for office as a nonpartisan candidate, that is, without belonging to any particular political party. The freedom to hold office in our government is not taken seriously enough by most Christians. It's a task they usually leave for someone else. Although we may be thankful for the Christians who are willing to use their time, talents, and freedom to run the public office, we need many more who are willing to do so. This is an opportunity of service to God that has been overlooked for too long. Campaign process. James Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, declared, "Next in importance to freedom and justice is popular education, without which neither freedom nor justice can be permanently maintained." The process of educating the voting public about the choices to be made in each election is called the campaign process. Much of the work of the political party centers on the campaigns. Their primary role is to nominate a candidate for office and work to get that person elected. But there is much that goes on long before that step. A person who wants to be considered as a candidate must first meet the specific qualifications of that office, such as age and residency. But beyond these concrete requirements, there are general expectations that should be considered, such as experience, character, and leadership abilities. This, of course, assumes that the general public knows enough about the potential candidate to evaluate these qualities. So the first step in the campaign process is to examine the viability of a run for office. This is known as testing the waters. This can be done formally by talking with people involved in the government, party politics, and potential donors. But much of it is done formally through public opinion polls, focus groups, and research, in an effort to measure how many people have heard of the potential candidate and know his or her stance on the issues. Name recognition is a key factor in raising the necessary funds and volunteers to run a successful campaign. As you can guess, the person who currently holds the office has a big advantage in these areas already. The current office holder is called the incumbent. If the campaign seems viable, the potential candidate will assemble a campaign staff. The staff will consist of a few paid individuals, a host of volunteers, and often a political consultant who specializes in running campaigns. The term will then set a campaign strategy. This strategy will include defining the candidate's position on key issues, the theme of campaign, how to raise and spend the funds available, and how to schedule the candidate's time. Part of the theme of the campaign is whether it will be a positive or negative campaign. A positive campaign focuses more on what the candidate can do if elected to office. A negative campaign focuses more on the job of the incumbent did or did not do while in office. When the negative reports deal more with the candidate's character or lifestyle rather than voting record and purposely cast suspicion, this is called mudslinging. The goal of the campaign strategy is to reach as many constituents as possible. The constituents are those people who reside in the district being represented by that office. Ideally, the purpose of the campaign strategy should be to find the best way to inform the voters. In practice, it often has more to do with swaying than providing information. In our diverse, splintered society, too many specifics can alienate potential voters. Much effort goes into saying just enough to gain votes and saying it in a general way without offering details so that a wide array of special interest groups can support the candidate. Given the size of the constituency in the presidential campaign, it can take a lot of time to create name recognition and communicate the candidate's positions. Most campaigns begin at least a year before the primary election, some even earlier. More time means more money is needed to maintain the campaign. Into the 2008 campaign, $2.4 billion was spent on the presidential race, over $1 billion of which was spent by the two major candidates. Barack Obama spent $730 million, and John McCain spent $330 million. Compare this to the $718 million spent in 2004 and $343 million in 2000. The rising costs of campaigning have caught the attention of many people who are concerned about maintaining our freedom and liberty. The high costs can restrict who can afford to run for office. It can also lead to wealthy citizens and organizations having a disproportionate influence on the election. Campaign finance reform. Does money mean influence? Does greater access to money source translate to unfair advantages? Those are two of the main assumptions behind effort to reform the campaign process. The Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 instituted the equal time rule. Hereby, radio and television stations operating under federal license had to give equal coverage to the candidates. The Supreme Court struck down several other aspects of the law in 1974. Congress then attempted to amend it throughout the 1970s, with portions of those laws being struck down as well. One element of the legislation that was upheld was making public financing available for qualified presidential candidates during the primary and general elections. These funds come from a unique source. Near the top of the first page of the U.S. Federal Income Tax Form 1040, there's a box that tax filers can check to contribute $3 to the General Election Fund. The Federal Election Commission was established in 1975 by Congress to oversee the public funding as well as enforcing the legislation and disclosing campaign finance information. The concerns regarding influence still remain. Legislation has been submitted to Congress over the past decade that includes calls for increased disclosure of contributors and limits on the amounts that can be contributed. These limits are applied differently to individuals and organizations. Distinctions have been made between giving funds directly to a candidate's campaign and issue-oriented campaigns. These limits added two more phrases to the campaign funding mix: hard money and soft money. Hard money refers to the contributions that are regulated by law. Soft money refers to funds donated to political parties in a way that get around these regulations. The Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act of 2002, more commonly referred to as the McCain-Feingold Act, sought to correct these abuses. The intricacies of the laws have birthed a variety of funding organizations such as political action committees and authorized campaign committees. The latter is why you hear a line at the end of the campaign commercial stating that the candidate authorized the ad. Political action committees are divided into those that support multiple candidates and those that do not. The fact that the word bipartisan was included in the 2002 law shows that the problem is recognized by individuals in both parties and across the political spectrum. Another ruling by the federal court in 2010 spawned super PACs, technically known as Independent Expenditure Only Committees. Such organizations may raise unlimited sums of money from corporations, unions, associations, and individuals. The unlimited funds can be used to advocate for or against political candidates, but may not be contributed directly to the political candidate. The Super PAC must report the donations and sources of the Federal Election Commission on a monthly or quarterly basis, adding to the difficulty of defining restrictions and limits in the abundance of issue advocacy ads, sometimes referred to as electioneering communications. These ads discuss issues that are often split along party lines. They can indirectly or overtly provide support for the party's candidate. Attempts to regulate these have also been successfully challenged in the courts. In all of the cases, the issue comes down to the public's right to hear and be heard, whether through financial contributions or through the media. Critics of reform legislation argue that in an effort to restrict abuses, the right to free speech is curtailed. Shaping public opinion. Our representative form of government requires an informed electorate to function properly. Each citizen is obliged to take the responsibility to become informed. That may not be as easy as it sounds. The reason is the difference between information and public opinion. An opinion is a belief or conclusion held with confidence. It may or may not be based on accurate information or proof. For example, a person may automatically vote for a candidate simply because he or she belongs to the particular party, whether or not the voter has evaluated the candidate's positions. Another definition says that an opinion is the prevailing view. Voting based simply on who is the most popular, on which stance is the most widely held, one undermines the principles on which a republic is established. The irony is that even though we live at a time in history where information can be shared almost instantly, it is often difficult to find objective, accurate, and complete information. Much effort goes into putting the right spin on a candidate's position, and that presentation can vary depending on the audience. This doesn't mean the candidate is deliberately trying to mislead, but it does help to reorganize and recognize why candidates seem to flip-flop on the issue so much. It is not uncommon for campaigns to be based on talking points. These are key phrases or buzzwords that the candidate wants to emphasize. Ideally, they should summarize the candidate's positions, but often they are designed to be easily remembered rather than give specifics. One reason why such ambiguous talking points have become so popular in the role of the media in campaigns. In the past, newspapers were the primary source of election information. Now, radio, television, and internet are the primary sources. These mediums all favor short bits of information, commonly referred as sound bites. They are catchphrases that capture the viewer's attention. They may or may not be the key points, since only so much coverage is available. Reporters can only summarize a candidate's presentation. Inevitably, some material will be cut. Depending on the reporter or editing staff's perspective, what gets cut and what aired can greatly influence how the material comes across. Comments can be taken out of context so that it means something quite different. Slanting information on purpose this way is called bias. An important step in combating bias is to examine the source of the information. Just because something appears in the media does not mean it's true. In a few cases, something can be communicated on purpose that is knowingly false. This is disinformation. It is becoming more prevalent, particularly through the internet. Since anyone can post anything and remain anonymous, opinions can be shared that have little or no basis in fact. Supporters of such social media point to the right of free speech, paying little attention to the right not to be slandered or libeled. Critics argue that this encourages voters to focus more on public opinion than on accurate information. In order to evaluate the source of information, you need to identify the underlying point of view of the author. This is known as a worldview. A worldview is based on the core values, beliefs, and assumptions about life that a person holds. A worldview answers the big questions about life. For example, what is truth, and can it be known? In our postmodern culture, the answer to that question for many people is that there are no absolute truths, and that true is relative based on the situation. To see how a worldview can affect the campaign process, consider the history of journalism. In the mid-1900s, journalists were expected to remain as objective as possible when reporting the news. Any hint of personal opinion was edited out. If the news reporter felt strongly about the topic, he or she could write an article for the op-ed page, short of opinion and editorial. Opinions were clearly marked as such, and the reader could evaluate the person's opinions based on supporting evidence of that offered. By the end of the 20th century, the distinction between objective news reporting and opinions pieces was blurred. By 1960, elections marked another turning point in campaigns. This was the first time a presidential election had occurred when the majority of households had television. The first televised debates pitted and then Vice President Richard Nixon against a relatively unknown senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was young, handsome, and charismatic. Nixon was not. Political commentators remarked that if the debates were evaluated based on tactics and points made, Nixon won, yet Kennedy was deemed the overall winner based on the public opinion. He had captured the viewer's attention based on presentation, not necessarily content. This impact of the media also colored the campaign process ever since. Either way, the media influences elections is through public opinion polls. This is where an organization pays a research firm to question portions of the public about their voting intentions and views on the issues. In a small town meeting or caucus, it is possible for every person to voice their intentions. It's impossible to question every person in this nation. Instead, a sample is taken that is supposed to represent the entire populace. A reputable research firm goes to great lengths to obtain a representative sample that has similar characteristics to the general population. As you may guess, this is very difficult to achieve. The chances of error can be significant. There is a way to estimate the margins of error, and this plus or minus range should be included whatever statistics are reported. The nature of public opinion is that the more something is reported, the more it influences public opinion. There are now public opinion polls that seek to measure how much public opinion polls impact public opinion. This tendency of the media's reporting to sway voter habits has raised another issue. Should the media project winners before the polls have closed across the nation? In the 1980s presidential election, one network predicted a victory for Ronald Reagan 15 minutes after the polls closed on the East Coast, based on exit polls of only 20,000 people. Exit polls questioned voters about who they voted for as they exited the polling station. It's assumed that the respondents actually voted for the person they reported. It was only 5:15 p.m. on the West Coast when voter turnout dropped significantly. Many concluded it was because voters felt there were no longer any reason to vote. Since that election, the networks voluntarily adopted the policy of not projecting a winner within a state until all polls had closed for the state. However, in the 2000 presidential election, it was alleged that some media outlets released exit poll results from Florida before the polls closed on the state's panhandle, which falls under a different time zone. Nor does it fix the issue across the different time zones of our country. In some nations, such as Great Britain, it is a criminal offense to report polling results before all polls have closed. In still others, the exit polls have been banned altogether. Rule by public opinion. The founders of our nation went to great lengths to balance the rule of the majority with the rights of the individual. The checks and balances inserted into our government structure were designed to guard against abuses of power. The founders reorganized the dangers and instability of public opinion. It's important for elected representatives to consider the views of their constituents when making policy decisions. After all, the voters who have elected them to office can also vote them out of office. But as we have seen, public opinion can be swayed by factors other than accurate information and valid evidence. Public opinion is often driven by emotional responses to events immediately after 9/11 attacks. There was widespread calls for more intensive screening of passengers at airports. Once the procedures were in place, the passengers were faced with long delays. Public opinions shifted the other way. Should a congressional representative only consider the views of the constituency when making policy decisions, or should the needs of the whole country be considered as well? One example is known as pork barrel spending. This refers to the federal funds given for local projects. Even though these projects, such as dams, libraries, and road construction, only benefit a small area, it was assumed that what helps one part of the nation helps the nation as a whole. In practice, however, the projects can be outlandish, obscure, and overpriced for what the local district gets for the money. In many cases, the projects are designed simply to gain the financial support of a specific individual or organization in the office holder's district. The funding provision is often tacked onto a totally unrelated piece of legislation in order to force the rest of the representatives to vote for it, thus bypassing the normal evaluation procedures. In 2010, Citizens Against Government Waste identified 9,129 of these projects buried in 12 appropriation acts. These projects added $16.5 billion to the budget deficit. Should the representatives follow the party lines in voting since the party officials helped elect them to office, or should they follow their conscience? Should the president or any other elected official push a policy that goes against the majority of public opinion if he or she believes it is the best interest of the nation? These are not easy questions to answer. In every case, they assume that the individual involved respect and honor God, His authority, and His principles. It has been said that we no longer live in a society based on biblical principles. If that is true, these questions become even harder to answer. Political labels and ideology. While our country favors a two-party system, the two major parties vying for power have changed throughout our history. To complicate matters, the labels attached to the same platform have changed. In other cases, the same word is attached to different platforms. In still other cases, positions on certain issues have shifted from one party to the opposite one. The chart of presidential elections in the appendix shows some of these changing party labels. The two major labels still illustrate opposite ends of the political spectrum, are conservative, known as right wing, and liberal, known as the left wing. Generally speaking, liberals believe the government should take an increasing role in the lives of citizens. If this means more regulations, restrictions, services, and taxes to pay for this increased role, then those should be legislated accordingly. While they believe the government needs to be able to protect and defend the nation, they favor less spending for the military and more emphasis on global peace initiatives. They tend to favor higher taxes, especially on the wealthy, rejecting the idea that such taxes hinder economic growth. Conservatives believe that the government should have a restricted role in the lives of the citizens. Regulations should be kept to the minimum in order to foster the free enterprise system upon which the nation was built. What services are deemed necessary should be provided by state and local offices or the private sector whenever possible. While they believe our nation needs to cooperate with global peace initiatives, they do not favor doing so at the expense of national sovereignty. They also favor more funding on the military to protect our national interests as well as lower taxes on the wealthy to stimulate economic growth. When it comes to social issues, the stance is flip. Liberals are more likely to favor less control and invite more openness. Conservatives are more likely to favor more control and protect traditional values. As with any label, the definitions are not clear-cut. Within each label, you can find ultra-conservative conservatives, moderate conservatives, and liberal conservatives. You can find conservative liberals, moderate liberals, or ultra-liberal liberals. Liberals who promote rapid reform on a large scale are known as progressives. Democrats who hold a liberal stance on government and regulation, yet hold to more conservative views on the social issues, are known as blue dog Democrats. President George W. Bush promoted the term compassionate conservatives in the 2000 and 2004 elections. The phrase described these individuals who favor conservative views of limited government and conservative values on social issues, yet assert the need to provide for those who are less fortunate through some sort of government intervention. Thomas Jefferson, the primary architect of the Declaration of Independence and member of the committee who drafted the Constitution, cautioned that the natural progress of things is for liberty to yield and government to gain ground. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose writing provided much of the ideological framework for our nation, added the following warning: free people remember this maxim: we may acquire liberty, but it is never recovered if it is once lost. Friedrich von Hayek, a noted Austrian economist and political philosopher of the 20th century, wrote, "Emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of individual liberty have been eroded." President Ronald Reagan was fond of offering this reminder: freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in their bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. President James Madison likewise reminded the American people, "I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of freedom of the people by the gradual, silent encroachments by these in power than by violent, sudden usurpations." Thomas Jefferson's assertion that democracy demands an educated and informed electorate means that the issues raised here cannot be ignored. The number of voices raised in warning suggestions, the issue can be easily overlooked. Every citizen has the responsibility to be diligent in recognizing and understanding the issues faced by our country. The use of the ballot. One of the best illustrations of liberty in action is the voting process. To many students in your class, voting may simply mean that your parents go to the polls on election day to mark a piece of paper, punch a hole on a card, or perhaps move some levers on a machine. Actually, voting is using one of the most precious freedoms we have in America. It is carrying out one of the greatest responsibilities a citizen can have in our republic. Requirements for voting are generally set by state law. The national constitution does say, however, that every state, in settling requirements, must give equal rights to people of all different races and to women as well as to men. A few of the other voting requirements made by most states are: number 1, voters must be citizens of the United States. 2, voters must be legal residents of the precinct or district in which the vote is cast. Number 3, voters must be at least 18 years old, sane, and not in prison. A primary election may require them to declare their party preferences, but such a procedure is never followed in the general election. Number 4, voters must register with the clerk of their voting district or precinct several weeks before the election day arrives. This registration book is kept at the polls on election day so that the election supervisor may be sure that a voter meets all the requirements. Before being allowed to mark the ballot, voters must sign the registration book. This is done so that the person will not be able to vote twice. In recent elections, verifying who is eligible to vote and confirming valid ballots have become pivotal issues, and in some cases may have influenced the winner. In the 2000 election, a problem with hanging chads, where ballots were not fully punched, went all the way to the Supreme Court. More recently, documented cases of widespread voter fraud have been cited. This issue will need to be addressed in order to ensure our freedom of choice is maintained. Anyone unable to go to the polls on election day may obtain an absentee ballot from the local election board. After being marked, the ballot must be put in a sealed envelope and returned to the election officials. They must see that it is counted along with the other votes on election day. Persons in the armed services and citizens visiting or residing in foreign countries may also vote and send ballots to the proper authorities. Types of election. Elections of many kinds are held in each community each year. School societies elect school board members. Church congregations elect elders and deacons. Clubs elect their own presidents, vice presidents, and other officers. Each organization generally requires only one election. The elections of public officials are, however, divided into two classes, the primary and a general election. The purpose of the primary election is rather easily understood. If 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats all filed as candidates for the office of county treasurer, it would be almost impossible for one person to be elected to office with a majority vote on the first ballot. In the primary election, the person of each party who receives the most votes is nominated to serve as the candidate of that party in the general election. In the general election, the voters must choose their new county treasurer from the 2 candidates who were nominated by their parties in the primaries. Between the primary election and the general election, the campaign is actively carried on by candidates of both political parties. Telephone poles and vacant buildings are covered with posters and pictures. Debates are carried on in the streets, over the radio, and on television. Citizens everywhere discuss and argue the issue of the qualifications of these candidates. Newspapers give all of the citizens an opportunity to prepare themselves to vote wisely on Election Day. When the morning of Election Day arrives, campaign voices are generally quiet. Voters go to the poll to perform the serious obligation of casting their vote. Flags mark the precinct polls and remind voters that they are enjoying an American liberty. The practice of electioneering, where campaign workers try to influence voters as they enter the polls, is typically prohibited in most locations, or at least restricted. The citizen steps up to a table of election officials. The official checks to see the person is properly registered. The voter then signs the registration book. In some precincts, you may mark a paper ballot in a private booth and drop it into the locked ballot box. Other precincts may use voting machines. Precincts that use the computer punch card system give the voter the needed card. In a private booth, the voter punches holes to indicate the choice. Such computer cards have done much to speed up the process of tallying the votes. Within 24 hours, in most cases, the will of the people is known. Whether the same office holders are retained or new ones elected, the continuation of government has been an orderly process. Voting is a precious liberty. The right to vote, the use of the ballot, is one of our most precious liberties. We must use it wisely to choose the best leaders for our government. As we use our right to vote, we are under God's controlling providence. The ballots cast by our citizens on election day are used to bring God's appointed people to their positions of leadership. We know this is true because the Bible says the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes, Daniel 4:25. When we use our freedom to vote, we help our nation under God, provide liberty and justice for all.